Okay, so I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I believe everyone who has seen the agenda knows the disclaimer and has the information on how to publicly participate. But if you do have any questions, please let us know. I believe we'll start with a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Here.
Mayor Horvath.
Here.
Subcommittee is here.
Very good. And now we'll turn to approval of the agenda. Mayor Pro Tem Meister, do you have any changes to our agenda?
No changes. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, so I don't have any changes either, so I believe we can move it by acclamation.
Yes.
And next we'll turn to public comment. I do believe we have public comment today, so we'll do that first.
Yes, our first speaker is Victor Omolchenko. Victor, you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Good evening, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and city staff. You know, watching President Biden's very fine speech last night and talking about the investments that may be done in infrastructure, and that it so tantalized me that I went and did a Google search, and I was thinking, whatever happened to the money that was passed a couple of months ago in the American Rescue Plan? And all that I was able to find online was that our Golden State was going to get $26 billion, and that $16 billion would be reserved to counties and cities with population over 50,000. And that made me think, oh, West Hollywood, we're under the 50,000, so we'll probably be dependent on money that comes to the county. And I look forward to learning more about what that money will be as we go forward. And the other thing is, I know that the two of you, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, you're going to be at City Council on Monday, and then the 5 of you are going to be recessing and meeting as the successor agency to the West Hollywood Community Development Commission. And, you know, I looked quickly at the staff report and the attachments. There were 6 attachments. What does it mean for concerned citizens? I just hope that at Monday's meeting, maybe somebody from city staff could give us a paragraph of what that all means. To me, what I saw was there were some funds for Plummer Park and some monies for affordable housing. But other than that, I just, you know, I'm not an expert in that. I know many people are, but the public should have a paragraph at the beginning of the staff report telling us, what does it mean to us, especially when there seem to be so many unfathomable, you know, amendment or, you know, attachments to it. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is about the money, the dinero, roshi pieniędzy, the all-important money, is that our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we need to continuously replenish that. And when I, on March 15th, I do know that the council voted to look at a zone text amendment to see how we could protect the integrity of our residentially zoned parcels, replacement of residential units. And given what's happened in the past with these different projects kind of falling through the cracks, most recently with the Friends of Palm Avenue appeal, when we tried to see if we could maybe get some affordable housing into the senior congregate living facility, I really think that we should get to that zone text amendment as soon as possible. We're getting to the smoking ban in apartments quickly, to the hotel helping the workers come back very quickly with alacrity. I would hope that as we lose rent stabilized housing units, we fill the cracks in those loopholes, in those holes, so that we do not have another center for early education, another private school on San Vicente with the loss of potential housing, and the loss of 6 rent stabilized housing units on Palm, with nothing coming back from a private school, a housing developer, or a congregate living developer. I think our funds could be replenished, and I really hope that
Thank you, Victor.
Goes forward with that zone text amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we got to hear you and your whole point. I don't believe we have any other speakers. Is that right, Madam City Clerk?
That's correct, Mayor.
Okay, very good. So We will turn to our agenda for a report from staff on our unfinished business, item 5A, update on the impact of COVID-19 on the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget, and discussion of the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. I'll turn it to our staff. Thank you very much. And if someone's
So I promised you we did rehearse this. We just didn't rehearse who was going to start first. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for meeting with us tonight. This is part of the budgetary process. We appreciate hearing from the public as part of the transparency and social engagement in putting together a working document for the City Council. The 2021-22 budget, or I'm sorry, the 2021 budget was disrupted, obviously, with COVID. Our next year's budget continues to struggle as we begin to reopen our economy. I think the signs are strong that when we are safe and we're open, that our economy will recover quicker than many of other regional cities. We're fortunate to have phenomenal businesses, hotels and restaurants, and from a budgetary perspective, within the next 6 to 9 months, we should be doing fairly well. Challenges businesses are facing continue to be the deferred rents, challenges in terms of bringing back staff. There are issues related to supplies, just in terms of being able to provide services to the customers here in West Hollywood. That being said, we have a strong and resilient business community. It has always been diverse, and that will enable us to recover fairly well. Some of the businesses that have been mothballed or shuttered for the last year may never come back. And those that are coming back will have challenges as back rents are due, and they have to make adjustments to balance those ledgers. For the city, we did have major drawdowns over the last year. And as we go into next year, we're anticipating over the next 3 years that we're going to have a deficit of between $30 and $40 million. And those are significant drawdowns on our reserves. We have reserves to cover that. However, I won't be here, and as a strong reminder to the leaders of the city, it is critical that over time those reserves be replenished, because this isn't the first economic challenge we've had, and it's not going to be the last. And I strongly encourage you, as you go forward, to set aside money to start adding back to our general fund reserves. The reserves don't only support general fund services, but all of our funds. The general fund is the base safety net for the city, and it's critical that those funds be replenished. Next slide. So today, we're going to give you an update on COVID-19. We're going to go through the third quarter of the current year in terms of our budget position, and then we're going to discuss next year's budget. What I would like to also remind us as we have these discussions, the City Council is smart in using subcommittees to address and tackle specific issues. Members of this subcommittee belong to other subcommittees with members who are not on this subcommittee, and we want to be careful as we have discussions about budgets and work programs that we don't create serial meetings. With that, I will hand the presentation over to Assistant City Manager David Wilson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem. So yes, I am David Wilson. I'm the Assistant City Manager. With me today is Christine Safrit, our Senior Management Analyst. And we'll talk a little bit about the COVID-19 impacts on the budget, and Paul's talked a little bit about that already. We'll talk about our current third quarter position, and then we'll go into the fiscal year 2022 budget. And also just hit some, for the most part, we are looking at a status quo budget, but there are going to be some expenditure increases, mostly in the areas of the new West Hollywood Park Arts and Recreation Center. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then also with public safety. So COVID-19 does continue to impact the city's resources. It's been longer than projected restrictions on travel and business operations, lower tax revenues, and canceled or postponed business activity, visitor spending. I'm sorry, someone's printing in here, so hopefully it's not too loud. The expansion of our public safety net for social services, legal services, and business services, and then just higher costs for cleaning and health protocols. So those have been really kind of the impacts on the revenue side. To address those on the expenditure side, just kind of a reminder of some of the things that we've done. We issued $90 million in bonds back in June of 2022, or I'm sorry, June of 2020. We postponed some of our major capital projects and maintenance from the general fund, but still using those bond funds when we can on some of the projects as well. We've canceled events and travel, reduced our contract services. We eliminated most of our temporary positions and froze the hiring on most of our existing regular positions. We implemented a furlough program and a retirement incentive program, and as well as using reserves, grants, and reimbursements to adjust the budget negative impacts. Next slide. So as we look at the actual impact and where we are today, this looks at the third quarter, so it's basically 75% of our budget year. And we are basically where we expect to be at mid-year, at about 74% on the revenue side and 75% on the expenditure side. Unfortunately, those numbers, the expenditure side is a lot higher than the revenue side. So in June of 2020, when we adopted the budget that started July 1, we were projecting revenues at 90 million and expenditures at 94 million, almost 95 million. So there was a projected drawdown from reserves of about $5 million. We adjusted that at mid-year because of the slow recovery and the increased, and the extended health orders that kept businesses closed and tourism down. So we reduced our revenue projections to 78.8 million. And then there were additional expenditures mostly related to the emergency needs, such as the housing rental assistance and business assistance. So that deficit increased from 5 million to 19 million at mid-year. And right now we're still on pace for that $19 million deficit. If we look at actuals right now, we're at about $14.7 million deficit with 59 million in actual revenues and 73 million in actual expenditures. We do hope to reduce that number. Mr. Onwuchekwu talked about the ARP funds from the federal government. The city will receive $6.9 million in those rescue funds. We hope to get those in the next few months. The Biden administration is also releasing additional FEMA funds that we hope to receive, in addition to the recovery happening somewhat sooner than we thought. It won't be much sooner. We're 2 months away from the end of the fiscal year, but hopefully in our discussions with the hotels and travel, we do expect these next 2 months to be a little better than the last two. So we don't expect that full $14.7 million deficit, but it will most likely be in double digits. And I will turn it over to Christine to talk about the fiscal year 2022 budget.
Thank you, David. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Great, thank you. My name is Christine Safrit. I am a senior management analyst for the city, and I'm going to be talking with you about our FY22 preliminary budget. We'll talk a little bit about revenues and about our expenditure growth, and then we will go into some public safety and West Hollywood Park and Aquatics and Recreation Center information. So first, the really good news. We are expecting a significant industry recovery for travel, tourism, and entertainment. And that means that we should have a significant bounce back for many of our revenue streams related to those industries. First and foremost is our hotel tax, which is coming back. We're projecting an $11 million increase in our hotel taxes this year to $18 million. This is still below the pre-pandemic levels, but it is a significant improvement to the hotel tax receipts that we are currently experiencing. We have our new Measure E sales tax going into effect right about now, actually. And in the next fiscal year, we anticipate receipts of about $10 million. That will bring our total sales tax receipts to about $25 million. Property taxes are going, the real estate market here in the Los Angeles region remains incredibly strong, and property tax receipts continue to come in on pace. With the MVIL fund, the Motor Vehicle in Lieu Fund, which is like a property tax, we will be receiving about $2 million more than we projected this year. So our total property tax and related revenues will be about $29 million. In total, our tax revenues will make up next year about 75% of our total general fund budget. And this is up 5% from our kind of historical average of about 70%. We're also looking at parking meter revenue increases of about $2 million. And what we learned this year is that our parking meter revenues are closely tied to our tourism and entertainment industry businesses. And so we anticipate to see an increase in those revenues as our businesses reopen. So our total with those new revenues, our total preliminary revenue estimate is $104 million, which is an increase of is a very positive increase over our budgeted revenue numbers for this year, which were about 90 million, and our adjusted budget, which was somewhere around 78 million. So significant revenue growth. On the operating side, we are also seeing expenditure growth, and our core operating expenditures we're anticipating to reach about $102 million. And the way that our operations typically break out are wages and benefits of about 40%, public safety contracts of about 20%, other contract services, so non-public safety and non-social services are about 21%. And then we have other operating costs. And other operating costs, just so you know, include the cost of maintaining and operating City Hall and other city facilities, including things like supplies and equipment. And then we are showing our social services contracts. We're maintaining just the spending on social service contracts alone is 5% of our budget, plus all the other work that the social services division that rent stabilization does. Those are wrapped into our other contract services and into our wages and benefits line. And then financing is over the last 5 years or so has been about 6% of our budget. And that's something that is going to change in FY22. So now I'll talk to you a little bit about the major increases that we are anticipating in FY22 this coming fiscal year. The first is West Hollywood Park and the Aquatics and Recreation Center. And David will go into some more detail on that for you in a few minutes, but we are budgeting for a $5 million increase to our budget, our general fund budget this year for the costs of opening and operating that facility. And while that's $5 million this year, that's for a mid-year reopening. And we are, when we look at the full costs of the facility, right now the budget is close to $8 million. So that's what we would if we were budgeting for 2 years right now, we would put into our year 2 budget. Our payments for 2020 bonds start this year. That was a $90 million bond issuance last year, and the additional financing costs are about $4.6 million. So our overall for our budget this year will be increasing from 6% to 10% on our financing costs as a proportion of our total budget. We are re-adding capital to our base budget as in a slow and measured way, and so we're going to bring back about $1 million in capital, a little bit under that. Traditionally, we budget closer to $3 million in our general fund for ongoing capital maintenance programs, and we do anticipate coming back up to that level over the next several years. In terms of public safety, we are recommending adding about $700,000 in public safety costs. And then for events, we are recommending adding about $2 million to our budget for major events. And I will talk about those in just a moment. First, we'll talk about public safety. And in terms of public safety, we've provided for you a breakdown of how our sheriffs spend their time. For the most part, the largest part of what they do is crime suppression work. They also, as you can see, work on things that include non-criminal homelessness assistance, mental health, traffic. Our deputies and our community impact teams support nuisance and code enforcement. They work on neighborhood livability and park patrols. We have a specific team dedicated to entertainment, and they go in and meet with our bars and clubs and work out on the streets in the evenings. We have special events and filming, which takes up some of our deputies' times. And then there's also a civilian support group that provides support for other things. This year for public safety, we are proposing, the public safety budget continues to grow, and we are proposing some expansions. The first has to do with the sheriff's contract. There is a contracted COLA, and that brought our base level sheriff's contract costs up this year by about $320,000 to $20.1 million for our base sheriff's contract. And that includes our patrol deputies, our community impact teams, our liability costs, some equipment costs, but it's our core services. And then that also includes our liability costs, and liability rates have increased over the past number of years from about 6% in 2015 to 11% now. And that liability cost has continued to grow over time, and is something that we continue to look at closely. The community impact team program is what the city purchases from the sheriff in terms of deputies on top of our regular patrol minutes. And so we have 11 positions in our community impact team. There are 5 cops, 4 entertainment policing deputies, a sergeant, and a lieutenant. And they are working all across the city, being bodies out on the streets, supporting our patrol deputies, and working special programs. We also added a mental health evaluation team a couple of years ago now, and that team provides mental health and homelessness services. It is comprised of a deputy and a licensed clinician, and we are proposing adding a second dedicated West Hollywood Met team, and that would be about $530,000 to add that team. We're also recommending adding $150,000 to address homelessness related impacts to the community in the public safety budget. Other major elements of our public safety program include our security ambassadors program, which is our, you're probably very familiar with. And then, and we're not proposing any expansions at this time. However, that $150,000 that we are proposing for homelessness related impacts, that could be divided in a number of ways, including for additional security ambassadors. And then finally, major events. And our major events last year in the budget, or this current fiscal year in the budget, we did not include significant funding for major events. For FY22, we are not recommending including funds for Halloween, but we are recommending including about $2 million for Pride events in June. The Halloween Carnival has historically been about a $2 million event for one night, and 60% of those costs are typically public safety related. For Pride, our last full Pride celebration was budgeted at about $4 million, and that include both event services, public safety, security. It included medical support and EMS services. And given where we are right now with monitoring developments in public health and in the city's financial position, the city manager preliminary budget includes about $2 million in funding. And we know that the event services and public safety teams are planning to come back to the full council with a more expansive look at what Pride will look like in the next year. And with that, I'll turn things back over to David to talk with you about West Hollywood Park and the Aquatics and Recreation Center.
Thank you, Christine. And we do have Kristen Cook on the Zoom call if there are questions specific to public safety, as well as Steve Campbell for if there's questions specific to the West Hollywood Parks Aquatics and Recreation Center, since these are major topics, our budget. So with the West Hollywood Park Aquatics and Recreation Center, as Christine said, we are looking at, so we are expecting for the new aquatic center to come online this coming fall. We are expecting that the ongoing operations of that new facility will be about $8 million. In the current budget, we're budgeting about $5 million because it won't be online the full year. We did have Citygate Associates who did the full staffing analysis for the city overall, do a more detailed look at the new facility. And these projections are based on their analysis. And we're looking at more of a phased approach. So we won't open everything in the fall, but we're looking at a phased approach that does have the full the Aquatics and Recreation Center and Park open next summer. So what's being proposed right now, based on the Citygate proposal, would be 8.5 permanent staffing positions, and 5 of those would be in recreation, or 3.5 of those would be in recreation, for recreation coordinators, lifeguards, and those type of positions, both full-time and part-time. The other 5 of those positions will be in facilities to maintain the facilities. And so we'd be looking at a total of 8.5 altogether. We'd be budgeting 7.5 of those this year, and then 1.3 million is the total cost of that. Even though the facility will not be open till the fall, we do need to start recruiting for some of those positions, so we do have them filled and ready to go when the facility opens. We're also recommending 70 seasonal employees. These are mostly recreation aides, mostly during the summer months, but some are year-round. We have some recreation needs that do happen year-round, but the majority are in the summer months. That's about $1 million in the proposed budget this year, 2022, and then 1.7 as an ongoing cost. The just operations of the facility itself is about 700,000 in the current budget and 1.2 million ongoing. Contracted services, these are our janitorial services and other services to maintain the facilities, is about 1.6 million in the current budget and 2.6 million going forward. And then we're also recommending adding another IT position because this is a lot of staff and we do need the support to be able to support the staff and technology for the facilities itself. So that's about 150 in the fiscal year 2022 budget, and then 250 ongoing. And then also public safety. We be hiring, are not hiring, but contracting with PAC West, our security guard services for 4 additional security guards, and then with Block by Block to provide assistance in the restrooms in various places around the park, similar to what we're doing at Plummer Park. We'd have 3 additional Block by Block staff. So that's a total of 7 staff, and they'd be there 7 days. 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And so that's $390,000 in the first year, and then another $650,000 ongoing. So total, again, we're looking at $8 million for operating that facility. I think we'll have more information once it's actually opens. These are projections now. We are comfortable with $5 million getting us through the first year, and then that will provide us with the time to see what it really costs to operate the facility. Next slide. And then we also wanted to talk a little bit about expanding business support during the economic recovery. Mayor Pro Tem Meister and Councilmember D'Amico, at their request, we looked at what's been deferred for businesses during the emergency orders. We did defer business tax certificate fees back in 2020. We deferred regulatory license fees, some of the outdoor dining and valet encroachment permits, as well as parking credits. Most of those deferrals have expired. Most of them have been paid, but there's still about $500,000 we project that hasn't been paid. We don't want to penalize businesses, continue to penalize them, those who aren't able to pay. So we'd be recommending that we provide an extension of the payment deadlines to December, the end of December 31st of 2021, to allow those businesses to pay without additional penalties or late fees. So it's basically a holiday or an informal amnesty period. We are not encouraging people to continue to grow more debt, but for those that can't pay right now, we do understand that during the recovery, we want to provide more time without incurring additional penalties and fees. This does not have any impact on some of the things that we've done recently, such as the 50% reduction for the current year for the business tax certificate fees. It would still be 50%, but those who couldn't pay wouldn't incur additional late fees or penalties if they don't pay when that tax is due in May. If they pay it in the summer, they wouldn't have fees. If they paid it in January of 2022 or later than that, then the fees would come back. They would have to pay the fees. But so hopefully this encourages businesses as they do recover to catch up on their debt without increasing it to more debt. And so lastly, I think we want to just touch on, there was a question from Mayor Pro Tem Meister about some of our contracts. And maybe I'll have Christine go over the slide because I haven't seen it. We did get this information just minutes before the budget subcommittee meeting started. So we will provide you all with the detail that we received from social services staff. But this is kind of a brief overview of the social services outreach that's currently being provided and the days per week and the cost of those. So Christine, do you want to go through that quickly?
Sure. So the question that we received was, who do we have on our outreach teams? How much is that costing? How many hours of outreach are we paying for? And what are the hours? What does the schedule look like? So on our public safety side, Our MET team deputy, the deputy and clinician work a 40-hour week, Tuesday to Friday, 10-hour shift. And that cost is the cost for a new team will be $530,000 per year. The cost for the initial team was slightly higher. In terms of social services, our providers include those listed on the screen. There are APLA, Essentia, Friends, the LGBT Center, Step Up WeHo, and the Trans Latina Coalition. Those programs are also, the total cost combined for their services related to outreach is about $300,000 per year. And from a scheduling perspective, this is just a brief overview of what the schedule looks like by vendor. So each agency's schedule is listed here on a Monday through Sunday basis. And then from a coverage perspective, this is a kind of like a daily schedule from 7 a.m. to midnight. And the gray areas show you the coverage that we have one or more outreach teams in the field providing services. So with that, I hope that answers the questions. And I think we are ready to move into discussion and next steps.
Yeah, great. And I think we want to spend the most of the time hearing from you all. Again, some of those specific areas regarding public safety and the new aquatic center, but basically any thoughts or concerns or information you have on the budget. Keeping in mind, as Paul said, that there have been subcommittees that discuss some of these things, so it won't be as much of a discussion as just providing us feedback. Before we do that, I just wanted to answer two other questions from Mr. Omachenko. He talked about the successor agency bonds that are being refinanced. Basically, what we're doing is refinancing bonds that were issued by the previous redevelopment agency. By refinancing those bonds, the city will get about $500,000 a year in additional property tax. The refinancing is split between all of the agencies that were part of the redevelopment agency. So it's the county, the school district, and various agencies. But basically, we're going to get $500,000 a year by doing that refinancing that will go into the general fund. And then his other question, it's replenishment of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we have, for a number of years now, have dedicated at least $1 million to go back into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So if, based on new development, it doesn't reach $1 million, we put $1 million from the general fund. But basically every year, new development, by paying those affordable housing fees, it has been $1 million or more that's gone into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so with that, I will now turn it over to the Budget Subcommittee for your comments and direction.
Great. And David, if I could chime in just real briefly before you do that. And it was mentioned, President Biden's speech yesterday and his great ambitions. The federal government gets to print money, we don't. We have an obligation to balance our budget. We've done that for many years. This budget cycle, like last year's budget cycle, is a little bit more unique in that we are doing planned deficit funding to support continuity of service. So it makes perfect sense that we have planned drawdowns, and that's a responsible thing that the council is doing, recognizing that we need to provide services and provide support to our business community. With that, while it seems like we don't have constraints, we still have constraints. It's going to be a tight year for us. We're trying to be as prudent as we can in terms of allocating resources. As David mentioned, as we're launching a new recreation facility, we can't open it up without opening it up. So it's going to cost us money, and we're trying to do that in a prudent manner. So with that, we look forward to hearing your thoughts, your questions, all of your issues. If we can't answer them tonight, we will follow them up in the staff report at the submittal of the budget. Some of your suggestions and questions may end up in the recommendations. Some of them may not, but they'll all be presented in a manner that the full council can discuss and deliberate and change the city manager budget. So that's the recommended budget. So that'll be an opportunity to do that. Lastly, David, thanks for the presentation. Christine, once again, you did a phenomenal job distilling $100 million worth of programming in the general fund plus all of our other funds into a concise report. And I admire you and appreciate the work you did on this. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you. I believe we have one public comment before we get into discussion.
We do, Mayor. So I'm going to stop the participant sharing. Victor, you are signed up to speak. Please note that you have 2 minutes to speak on this. If you want to turn your camera on. Oh,
Okay. I have, and it's not.
Yeah, because once you should be able to now. There you go.
Thank you. My Victor Omolchenko again. My internet connection has been kind of funny, so if I haven't heard everything, I did hear Mr. Wilson explain a little bit about how the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is replenished, and that's good to hear. Here are my quick questions based on the staff report. I know the city has had to go through a hiring freeze over the past year since the pandemic began, and having been in the federal government, it was mentioned that most vacant positions haven't been filled, but some were. So I would be interested in knowing what positions were so essential that indeed they were filled. That's coming from my angle when we used to have reductions in force in the federal government. And I think that the report would have been enhanced if we knew at the beginning of each fiscal year, like July 2019, July 2020, July 2021, how many FTEs are there in city government? How many full-time equivalent employees do we have? I know we're going through a rough time. I know there have been furloughs, but
And we lost.
At this time, they're recommending. What?
You're freezing.
Ugh, it's unstable. I'm sorry. In terms of the Halloween carnival, they're recommending that it not be funded in the fiscal year 22 budget. I agree with that. The Pride budget, I'm somewhat confused about, but I'll call Ms. Safriat about that. About the 4-person entertainment policing team deputies that are in charge of looking over 90 entertainment venues. Given that there wasn't that much entertainment between March 2020 until recently, I would just be curious, what were they policing? Were they reassigned if there weren't any entertainment venues and hotels that they were policing? I would like to know more information about that. Were they looking at the gangs that are referred to in the report? So I'm curious about that. And for Mr. Arevalo, the fact that he helped build up a strong reserve, that's very, very important. But the fact that we're going to be $36.2 million in the hole when June 2022 comes, based on good estimates, whatever money comes in, for instance, if it's not encumbered from Biden's $6.9 million, let's finish our general fund reserves. And I'm sorry for the bad connection, but let's build up our general fund reserves back to what they have historically been under Mr. Arevalo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I second that, Victor. Thank you.
Now, given the parameters of our discussion, I just want to be clear. Are we able to ask questions and deliberate since this is a public meeting, or is there a concern about Brown Act discussions?
My only concern would be if you belong to a subcommittee that is on recreation services with another council member. It's hard for you to advocate for something in this meeting that you would be advocating with that other subcommittee. So it's a fine line. I think you can ask all the questions you want. I think you can suggest what you're at. And here's the fun part of this is that it's like a visioning process. You can ask any question. You can ask us to include analysis in the document. Even though you're a committee, we'll take that as individuals. Where it gets dicey is if the two of you are voting on specific recommendations and saying the subcommittee wants X, Y, and Z. This is more of a community vetting process that allows for the public, Victor, to participate in the development of a policy document. And what we will do from staff's perspective is take all of your input as general input. It'll be analyzed and presented to the full council for consideration, as opposed to the two of you locking in on a particular program and saying the subcommittee wants to do this. So that I think protects us from that. And it also gives the two of you a lot more flexibility that you don't necessarily need to have consensus on your ideas.
Okay, given that, then it sounds like what we'll do is ask our questions and have individual comments, and we won't be taking any votes as a subcommittee, since it sounds like there are conversations happening other places. So I'll turn it to Mayor Pro Tem first.
Thank you. And if I overstep, someone just mute me. I have some questions. First, perhaps I know Kristen Cook is on the line. If she could just answer the question about the CIT, that would be helpful.
Mayor Pro Tem, are you talking about reassigning entertainment policing team?
Yes.
Yes, so they were reassigned, especially during the very beginning of the pandemic when the whole world stopped. So we saw a vast reduction in Part 1 crimes overall, but where we did see increases were thefts from kind of like laundry rooms, just kind of easy to find places, leaving laptops, where somebody could see them. They were doing neighborhood patrols around cookies. They were providing security checks for closed businesses to prevent burglaries into those businesses, that type of thing. And they were moved around based on crime statistics, based on neighbors' requests, and they're adjusted really weekly. The lieutenant and the sergeant that oversees those deputies takes special care to make sure that their time is well spent.
So, yeah, okay. So just wanted to ease the public's mind that they weren't just playing pinochle or something. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about recreation and just ask, we have recreation fees, and I know that they're not high, and obviously we don't want them to be high for our residents, but we do have a difference in fees for residents versus non-residents. And now that we have this world-class aquatics facility, are we considering altering our fees in any way to try to bring in some additional revenue to pay for all of this staff and
and I'm going to jump in, and Steve's going to give the more nuanced and correct answer. But yes, we are looking at our fees. Also, I think this is a red flag for the council to deal with, because I'm going to be gone, is there are people who use our facilities and pay nominal rates for our facilities, and they run for-profit businesses out of our parks, and they make a lot of money and they take up a lot of space, and we're not getting a return on investment. And that's something that it's a difficult conversation, because these are popular activities, but whether it's a nonprofit or not, they're making money. It's not a not-for-profit. They may be nonprofits, but they're making a profit, and they're doing it at the expense of our resources. And that's going to be a deep and I think a difficult conversation to have, but it needs to be had, because it's a public giveaway, and we just need to be aware of that. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Good evening, Mayor Horvath, Mayor Pro Tem Meister. We are bringing forth a new fee resolution that will include a number of increased fees, along with one of the items that was studied in the Citygate study that David mentioned was a scholarship program. I believe that was a directive from Mayor Pro Tem Meister some time back. So we'll be bringing those items forward along with a whole cadre of other policies and procedures that will go with the new building. One of the things we realized early on as we started studying these things was we needed to get those items really kind of solidified and expand that across the whole department so that we would be able to really manage effectively both with the opening of the ARC and then with the other programs and buildings that we have in the department and the city.
Okay, great. I mean, that's something that I would definitely include in recommendations is, I mean, that was the first thing I thought about with the fees. So
I think if you're up for it, I think it would be great. And again, I won't be here, but I think this would be a good committee to do a dry run on that analysis as the finance subcommittee, to share that with the two of you prior to the council, the full council meeting.
Absolutely.
I'll do that.
And on the one of the reasons that I asked the questions about the outreach teams, I'm less concerned about the hours of the Met team than I am of the other outreach teams. It seems to me, and it sort of was validated by the schedule that was shown on screen, that we don't always have outreach teams out when we have homeless people in the streets, which is usually early morning, late at night, on the weekends. And I don't know what influence we have in changing those schedules, or if our providers are unable to provide different schedules, at least for us to pilot or test, then maybe we need to expand we need to look at some different providers, because that is a concern for me, is when the outreach teams are actually out there. So.
And I see Corey's on the call, but maybe she can chime in. I mean, a lot of it in terms of the outreach, while we see things anecdotally and we think that's the high contact point, they may have more detail, but it would be useful to hear from her in terms of when they're doing the outreach and how that works. Corey.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, there are, and David Juni's on the call as well, and oversees those contracts. Certainly we know that, homelessness is not limited to business hours and Monday through Friday. We have been looking at some alternate responses and some other ways and vehicles to respond during those times. And mostly what we were looking at is crisis response versus just straight outreach. Oftentimes the person that you see sometimes in the morning, Mayor Pro Tem, is in another part of the city in the afternoon, and they are engaged with a provider. But we know that we are, we hear from residents, we hear from council about those kind of early morning and evening hours. The challenge is also, and David can speak to this as well, is that after hours, there's no place for people to go. There's no 24-hour shelter. So even if we had outreach, they would just be able to engage with the person. They would not be able to make a placement in, most of the time, not into substance abuse recovery program or into a homeless shelter, because those facilities are not run as 24-hour facilities. These are conversations that we continue to have and that we will continue to have. But those are some of the kind of challenges in terms of looking at early morning, weekend, evening hours, is the access to any other service at that time other than outreach.
Does that include county facilities as well, county shelters?
Which
I mean,
we don't.
Early morning or late evening or weekends.
The only other, we have the contract with Essentia for shelter beds and with the LA LGBT Center. LASA stands up some sometimes winter weather shelters or wet weather shelters, but there's not a separate county shelter I'm aware of that we have access to beds in.
Okay, thank you, Corey. So in terms of, I don't know if you, Mayor, if you want me to just go ahead and give my comments on, okay. Regarding events, I'm supportive of not having big events until we're in a better place financially. I do want to clarify, I know that Victor said something about us being 36 million in the hole. We're not 36 million in the hole. We've drawn down our reserves 36.2 million. So we have about 50 something million in there. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for the public. I do think, though, we will still need some budget for public safety, because we know that even if we don't have a formal city event, that organically there will be a party on Santa Monica Boulevard on Halloween, and there will be parties for Pride as well. So I know that we do need to budget something, but I don't think that unless we have just a stellar year revenue-wise, that it's fiscally responsible to put too much money into an event. I mean, if somebody else wants to put that money into an event, I would be open to that. But for us to be putting money into an event, I would have concerns.
Right. And I think too, as we look at reinventing these activities, it's a chance to reinvent these activities. It's shocking that close to 20% of our public safety budget goes to 2 events. Those are huge numbers. It's huge numbers and huge risk to the city. So I think as we kind of reevaluate and reinvent and reboot these events, the scale and massing should be considered to represent West Hollywood. I think they've been great and we've been lucky, but going forward, this is an opportunity to reset the table.
And then regarding the additional funds for public safety, I think that's very important. I won't get into specifics. I mean, maybe what we do is, because we may not be able to talk about it, Mayor, maybe we say we are supportive or not supportive. I don't know how you feel about $600,000, whatever the total was of that, but not maybe get into the specifics of how it is dispersed or distributed. One of the things that, I would like to see are some, results from the Center for Policing Equity before we start saying, let's give this much to, the sheriffs and this much to, block by block, or this much to MET. I do think that all of these resources are very important, and I think that we should budget for them as if we're going to use them. But I don't know if that's something that we can discuss, since I'm on the homeless committee. And so I will just say that I'm very supportive of as much funding that we can give public safety in general as we can give. We need to deal with the issues of homelessness. We need to deal with issues of residents feeling safe walking on the streets of our city. And we need to make sure that our businesses can be open and feel safe, because that will eventually or ultimately help our revenues. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions and then we'll offer some comments. First, what is the percentage of our budget that the sheriff's contract represents? Just the contract itself.
It's a lot lower this year.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Christine.
It's about 21% this year.
And what is it normally?
Normally it would be higher, closer towards 25%.
Okay. And the rental assistance program that we've had in place during COVID, how much if any, is still allocated to that, and will we be continuing that program?
We do still have funds allocated for that program. Total overall in our emergency services allocations, the budget. One second while I pull that up.
And David Juni's on as
Yeah,
well.
David raised his hand. If you want to add more while she's looking that up, David.
So we had looked, good evening, Mayor Horvath, Mayor Pro Tem Meister. We had allocated, made our best estimate to get us through the rest of the end of the fiscal year with the two programs between NCJW and the Alliance for Housing and Healing. And we are on course for that. NCJW has approximately about $320,000 left, and the Alliance for Housing and Healing has about $85,000 left. We have approved, you have approved 5 accesses to services, to the rental assistance. Right now, the average grant amount is about $650.
So we still have funding available to continue through this fiscal year or calendar year, or how are we planning?
We should have plenty to finish this fiscal year if we keep the same structure with allowing 5 accesses to grants.
Okay, and if we needed to expand, do we have enough for another round?
We would meet, the agencies do a really good job in, putting in the predictions. We may need to come back and ask for a little bit more. Right now, we have a comfortable cushion, but that's with the 5 access, the 5 grants.
And one of the challenges with the budget is these types of emergency services and support, both to the residential community and to the businesses. We're trying not to be super precise in terms of budgeting on that. We just want to maintain a certain flexibility. So these are going to be items that if they come up, we're just going to bring them to the council and just say, this is continuing, we need resources. And the council has definitely stepped up to provide those services, because it's just too hard to predict. So we would rather continue it on an emergency basis. And that also enables us then to attempt to apply for recovery funds that aren't there. So we're tracking it right now in terms of forecasting the current needs. We're good, but I'm not going to be surprised if in August that they're going to come to you with another staff report asking for more money.
Yeah, I just think that given as we're coming out of COVID, even, depending on when, right now the date is end of June, but, depending on what an emergency order allows for, I think that will continue to be a conversation. I just want to make sure we're financially prepared for some sort of impact. Same thing with nutrition assistance. I know we created a new program with Project Angel Food. How long do we expect that program to continue?
So similarly, the last time we asked for funding for all the emergency services, it was to get us through the fiscal year, and we are on track. We had also received, we were allowed to use CDBG funds for Project Angel Food's emergency meal delivery. We have now spent those out, and we are on the last allocation from council, which was an additional $130,000, and that should get us through June.
So do we expect to continue the senior program past June?
So with all of these programs, we are looking to LA County Public Health, orders as far as when things can open up. And, when it's safe, this whole, as the idea behind the home delivered meals and the delivery of packaged groceries was so that our vulnerable older adults and community members with disabilities could stay home. So we really gauge it with how we are doing countywide with the public health orders. And as long as that is still the direction, we will continue to keep these programs online.
Great.
And we can provide an update with the budget at the second meeting in June, because we'll have a better idea of where we are with the emergency funds. So we'll include an update at that time.
That would be great. Thank you, David.
Yeah. Bottom line is we've extended a number of lifelines to the community, and we're not going to pull them back. So we'll be prepared to discuss this further.
Just to mention it, then I will also say the same for the transportation services. I know some people have relied on those for testing, for vaccinations, and other things related to COVID, as well as other non-COVID related issues. So I want to make sure those services continue to be available as people need them. And what percentage then of our budget overall is our social services for the community?
It appeared that it was 5%, correct, Christine?
It's 5% only for that contract line. The whole social services budget, again, if you would, I can bring that information back to you, or if you give me a minute, I can get you that detail.
Yeah, it's well over 10% if you include all the transit programs and the mental health programs we're providing. But
yeah, would love to know that number. So if it's okay, I'll ask other questions while you do the math.
Yeah, that's such a tricky number, Christine. If you're comfortable doing it now, or we could just add it in the report as part of the transmittal, because I don't want to give one number now and a different number then. But if you're comfortable pulling it together, do it. But I think for information purposes, I'd rather have it right. It's your call. If you can do it, do it.
You're on mute.
Sorry.
You're on mute. Yeah.
My computer. I will see if I can get you a reliable number, and if so, I will let you know.
Okay, sounds good. And sounds like there's some reading between the lines there. So I think in speaking about events, we've as a council again made decision about major events for this calendar year. But I do think that similar to the conversation we recently had with regard to Pride, I do think that supporting our businesses and accommodating festivities for Halloween, which are typically, what people come to the city to enjoy, especially as things are opening up. Perhaps it's not a budgeted item, but I do think that making sure we're able to accommodate businesses, whether it's expanded out zones or, whatever their requests might be, I'm interested in making sure that we're able to safely accommodate people who will come here regardless. But I think separate from community events or from major events are community events, which will certainly come back to play. And I think making sure that we have appropriate staff for community events. I know there used to be 2 positions dedicated to this, and maybe having both of those positions filled to be able to, just given what the new realities will be with people coming back into community spaces and in-person events. I think we need to make sure we, maybe, I don't know if that's already contemplated as part of the recreational budget or how you're thinking about that, but community events have typically been how we do a lot of programming and making sure we have people available outside of, our CLA team, which I think has their hands full in a lot of ways already, expanding service support and service for that would be important. I'm glad that we were able to find a way to manage our budget that continues to accommodate the needs that are top of mind for our residents. And, up to the moment in terms of relevance, I think there still remain things that have historically been part of our budget that we're not yet ready to bring back into the conversation, though we will be seeing a new sense of what things might look like moving forward. I think continuing to engage the business community as staff has regularly to keep our hand on the pulse of what the issues are is important. And I know the council has taken action to that effect, and it seems that we are addressing some of what their financial concerns might be in terms of some of the fees and all of the ways that they interact with the city. I know that that continues to be a conversation. And so this item, you'll be taking our feedback. Will there be another subcommittee meeting before the second meeting in June, or is this it?
As of now, we're not planning one. If something comes up, any bumps along the road in terms of extensions of orders or other fiscal issues, then we will reconnect with the two of you. But as of now, and while this seems rather uneventful, it's because it is uneventful. We're doing a major status quo budget. Normally, we would be in the thrust of a 2-year budget cycle and really doing a deep dive into the work program and tying it to our strategic plan. But right now, it's just a real incremental and kind of small steps as we move the organization forward. So the short answer is yes, this is the one outreach to you. If something again does come up, if there are particular issues that we did not foresee, then we would then reconvene the committee.
Very good. Then I guess I will just sort of offer the general comment that we want to make sure that capital projects, and city-owned properties are, to the extent that any of those projects, like the parking lot at Crescent Heights in Santa Monica, what its future will be. Some of the other city-owned properties, I know that the budget accounts for some of that, but just making sure that it's maintained, and to the extent that we can get any of these facilities that are in the city's possession up and running to actually provide the service they were intended for. I know we're being responsible about our budget, but we've purchased these properties for certain uses. So I want to make sure that the city benefits from that.
So, the strategy in the budget development has been to, number one, provide the public safety umbrella for the community, both from the sheriff and from the health orders. To make sure that we're providing the needed services, especially the social services, human services to our communities in need. But we've also have been extremely responsible in not saving $1 today to spend $2 tomorrow. So with our infrastructure, we've been maintaining it to the highest level, recognizing some of the challenges in terms of staff workload. We do have a new focus team on property development. It's evolved a little bit from just the commercial sites, but also including some potential residential development. But that's their primary goal and primary target. And it's critical that we don't overburden their work program where they lose focus. So from the budgetary standpoint, it's there, and totally recognize what you're saying, because these are expensive assets. And if they're not generating public benefit in terms of resources, then we're failing, and we need to stay on top of that. And that's definitely a major priority in the budget. It continues to be that. So yeah, thanks for that reminder, but yes, short answer is yes.
Yes, and I know that there's sort of a multi-layered conversation happening around public safety. But to me, I think community safety isn't just in terms of, a law enforcement response to a call, though that is one thing that our community relies on. I do think that in the pie chart of things that we are expecting our local law enforcement to provide, I think some of those services can be provided through community partners and investment in social services to provide that care and get people off the streets, into treatment, into housing. I know that the city has had a good track record of being able to do that with our partners. And so investing more in that, I think, is a good thing. And making sure that, while unfortunately we feel the impact of what the regional crisis is within our own boundary, I do think that we know we have found ways to get people off the streets, into housing, into care, that helps them get into housing or back into jobs and other things that will help keep them, off the streets. And so while I appreciate that we've had many conversations around the complicated issues related to homelessness or mental health issues, and the intersection that they can at times see with public safety issues, I don't think that either of those issues are strictly public safety as it relates to law enforcement issues. I think they're more social service in nature. And I hope that our response to them and our investment in those services will reflect that priority.
100%. Yeah, we dedicate a tremendous amount of resources to dealing with the bigger pandemic than COVID, which is homelessness in California, Los Angeles, and in West Hollywood. One of the areas that we need to recognize too, and not to throw up our hands and say that it's not solvable, that a lot of the solutions are outside of our scope. They're at the state level, they're at the county level. The county refuses to recognize that we need better tools to address the homeless crisis. We had a meeting up in Sacramento before COVID, and we're meeting with agencies that represent rights for the homeless community, and they're doing such a good job that their clients are dying on our streets. I mean, it's really difficult, and we have the full wraparound services. We're committed to funding the complete support for people who need help, and yet they're just not willing to allow for cities that do this to have better control to get people help. And the fact that somebody can be living out of a trash can for an extended period of time, and they're saying that person is not is able to take care of themselves, that's just unacceptable. So I think while we continue to spend, again, tremendous amounts of our general fund dealing with this crisis, the tools are there. We just need to get the county to recognize them and to allow us to flex that muscle. The other thing I wanted to jump back on too is when the mayor asked for a straightforward question about how much we spent on social services. When I got here 30 years ago, that was a real easy answer. We just looked at the social service contract and the social service budget, and we gave you a number. Right now, social services, and this is part of the challenge with operations in every city, has spread out beyond just the traditional social service program. I mean, do the MET programs count as social services? Our transit programs, our food services? So just to be a little bit more delicate in how we respond, we're not trying to hide anything. It's just a little bit more nuanced. So we will definitely provide you that information. It'll be part of the report to council.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I have one more request for our meeting, and to go back to the events, and I'm glad that Mayor Horvath brought up the community events, the smaller events. I know obviously this year we haven't been meeting in person, so to try to figure out how our events are being attended, et cetera, it doesn't make any sense. But if you could bring back whatever the last year where we did have in-person events, by the analysis that we've seen before with the number of attendees, how much we've spent on events. And my reasoning is that we have also found that we could be very successful doing some events by Zoom, by having webinars and Zoom events. And so I think it might be worth a conversation about events that are costing a lot per head, and we don't have many attendees, but we love these events. To look at them and just look at events and say, well, maybe this one we can do this year via online, and save some money on staff and whatever else is included in those events. So I would just like, if you can include that in our packet, so that we can have that discussion, I would appreciate it.
And we will.
Yeah, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say we will include it. We include it every year, so we'll include that as part of the budget. We did cut the events by 20%, like we did with all the other expenditure costs. And unfortunately, the online events weren't a lot less expensive than the in-person events. So most of those budgets were actually spent this year. So we'll bring you back the actuals this year, as far as the virtual events, as well as actuals for previous years.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to have that comparison.
And I'm going to just throw this out there because I'm getting ready to retire, is when the council originally asked for this report, we were all thinking, all right, we're going to like cut back on events. And it was almost as though the council looked at the calendar and said, oh, wait, there isn't an event this weekend. Let's do something. So I think one of the challenges is that we just, and I think that there's a objective conversation to look at dialing some of them back. That's not what happens, and that's not what happened in the past. So we'll definitely provide that. We do think that there's an overload on events. The impact has been diminished because there's so many of them, but we just keep adding to the list. But definitely we'll bring that on there. It is supposed to be a focused discussion point during the budget deliberations. So we'll bring that back to you again with the report.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that covers the subcommittee's comments, but there's also an item for additional staff comments.
Yeah, I think we're done talking. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This was very helpful for us, and for Victor for participating. Thank you for being there. We appreciate your thoughts and feedback.
I still miss Victor's songs. Maybe he'll bring one back next time. Thank you all for the work that you've done to provide us with a budget that allows us to continue to serve our community. Sounds like you'll be coming back with responses to the areas that we've highlighted, as well as I know you'll be hearing comments from our colleagues as well. But thank you very much for your time tonight, and we are adjourned.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.